U.S. Head of Sales at Soundtrap for Education. For the last 5 years, Chad has worked with schools and districts all over the world who want to offer new, creative learning opportunities to students across core subjects. Prior to Soundtrap, Chad was a sales executive and sales leader at IXL Learning. He started his professional career teaching middle and high school history in Oakland Unified School District in California. He's based in the San Francisco Bay Area and loves reading, punk rock, and reading about punk rock. Welcome, Chad. We're also joined by Brian, one of the LTC's instructional technology coaches serving the Winnebago County region. Brian is an accomplished educator with a passion for integrating technology into the K-12 classroom. In his current role, Brian has presented at numerous renowned conferences, including ISTE Live, CPS Google Palooza, IdeaCon, and the Illinois Education and Technology Conference. Outside of the classroom, you can find Brian searching for cheap international flights, 3D printing general nonsense, taking in some of his favorite live music, or ignoring reality by reading a book in the middle of the woods. Welcome, Brian. And I'm Linda, your webinar facilitator. I'll be behind the scenes making sure that everything runs smoothly, as well as interacting with you in the chat. So let's get started.
Well, hello. What's up, Chad?
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Oh, just, it's a little bit cold. Like, I think we're about to hit a winter advisory here in Illinois. So I'm like bracing because we had great weather for like a good time period, but now we're hunkering back down.
What does cold mean for you? Because like I live in California, so cold is like 50 degrees.
I mean, you are in Northern California, so you have like some semblance of cold, but like we're looking at, I think at my like dash when I was like driving around today was like 26 up here in Northern Illinois.
Woof. Well, if it's any consolation, I was in Sweden all last week with the entire Soundtrap team, and we were in a resort that was like 8 hours north of Stockholm, and it got down to like 10 or 15 degrees. So
yeah,
I could somewhat relate. Yeah,
I get it. And so yeah, no, but I mean, I'm excited to be here today talking about we're talking together about beyond worksheets audio projects for powerful learning with Soundtrap.
Me as well. Thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to be here and talking with the LTC and all these teachers and from across Illinois. So thanks to everybody shouting out where you're from. Looks like we've got a great group of people here today.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, no, we're looking at folks all over Illinois, and let's think about like, hey, how can I do something differently? Because we're seeing all those dips in engagement, how I can better reach students and find those ways. And one of the ways it's definitely nice in doing so is thinking about hey, podcasts. I mean, I know that we've all got our favorite podcasts, and why can't students do the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And key word there is engagement too, right? The words that I find synonymous with Soundtrap are engagement and connectivity. Two things that I think we realized coming out of the pandemic and a year or so of remote learning is something that is more important than ever to make sure that kids invest in their educational experiences. So that's something that we aim to help schools and districts with, is helping them re-engage with their students and connect students with themselves and each other and their school communities and their outside communities too. So excited to dive in today.
100%. Love seeing all those folks in the chat from all over Illinois. Let's dive in today. Let's go over kind of what we're going to be going through, and let's get down to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's our playlist for today. As Brian mentioned, our focus is going to be on Soundtrap and specifically like audio projects that manifest in the form of podcasts in the classroom. So we'll go over what Soundtrap is as a platform, as an organization, why audio projects are so important in education today. That could be an abstract concept for some, but what we're finding is that more and more every year, students and educators are gravitating towards podcasting as a way to demonstrate knowledge and understanding. And then we'll start to wrap up with some ideas for classroom implementation, and then a Q&A and a special offer for everybody that's here on the call today. But as we're getting started, and the topic for today is podcasting, I hope we got some people that are podcast listeners on the call. If you can, in the chat, write down some podcasts that you're listening to right now on Apple Music or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast content from.
wherever. I mean, definitely having those podcasts make those commute easier, but also it's like, hey, how can we learn with it? How can we learn some more things from each other, especially? And so I'll come in a little bit later on, talk about ideas for the classroom. So you'll hear from me just a little bit, but I'm going to turn it on over to Chad, who's going to talk about Soundtrap EDU specifically and how it's kind of a rad platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so Soundtrap for Education is an online recording studio for music making and podcasting. Soundtrap is a Swedish-based company. We launched in Stockholm, Sweden in 2013. Primarily, the first version of Soundtrap was direct to consumers. We didn't even originally intend for this to be an education product. And over the years, we started seeing our use in education grow 100% organically. And then in 2015, we ended up winning the best EdTech tool named by the American Association of Librarians, which was a complete surprise to us. So it was at that point we realized, like, hey, this is something that educators want to use and want to explore. So we built out our platform to be safe and secure for student use. So we designed it to be COPA and FERPA compliant. And then we added in additional tools outside of the studio to make it easy to add students to this and collaborate with one another in real time. So again, Soundtrap is 100% web-based, which means that it doesn't matter what device you're using in your school or your classroom. All you need to do is go to Soundtrap to log in to access our recording studio. It works great on Chromebooks. It works great on phones and tablets. And really, like, its true power is letting students be able to access the content from anywhere. So if you're implementing a podcasting project or unit in your classroom, your kids can start the project today in their classroom on your classroom Chromebook. They can put that back in their cart. They go home on their way home from school, and they're in the car. They pull out the Soundtrap app on their phone, keep working on their project there, and then maybe later on at night they get on the family computer at home and finish their work. Yeah. So when we think about Soundtrap as a really a vehicle for podcasting, why should we look at podcasting as a form of knowledge demonstration, right, or content mastery in a classroom? And really, it's because we see a lot of data out there right now to kind of prove that podcasting and sharing student voice is really something that is not only good for the student and the soul, but also the brain as well. So when we think about, like, the hard skills that come with podcasting, this is really something that helps us develop literacy and fluency. At the end of the day, podcasting is a way to develop speaking and listening skills, which we know are two of the pillars of broad spectrum literacy. As teachers, we always focus on reading and writing. We want to make sure our kids are reading and writing at grade level. But over time, it's easy for us to skip over those activities or those things that allow us to make sure that our kids are developing their speaking and listening skills. And so that's where podcasting and storytelling can really play a pivotal role in your classroom as your students are creating content and producing content to demonstrate what they know. There's also a lot of amazing scientific data to show how podcasting and creative learning opportunities create, like, these salient learning experiences that create neural hardening and neural plasticity, which leads to literacy development, memory and retention, all of these great things. So outside of the science too, we also see that there's data in the industry, in the creative industry, that suggests that our kids are ready for this, right? So when we think about our students, especially in middle school and high school, who we classify as Generation Z or Gen Z, Gen Z is becoming and is the creator economy, all right? So we always think of, like, their relationship with social media, right? And sometimes we see it as problematic. But if you look at the data, when you look at the top social media apps that students are using, it's not Facebook and it's not Twitter. It's not apps that they're just, consuming content. It's TikTok, it's Instagram, it's Snapchat. It's all these things where they're actually creating content. So our students are showing us that they want to create content, not just consume it. And they're doing this every day on their own, right? They're using social media as a way to express themselves and connect with others around them. So with Soundtrap's platform, what we aim to prove is, like, we can help you channel your students' creativity, their creative energy into their schoolwork. And by doing that, we instantly give their work and their learning experience more meaning, okay? There's also a lot of amazing data that's coming from kind of the leaders in podcasting today. One source that I really like is Spotify. And for those of you that are familiar with Soundtrap, at one point in time, we were part of the Spotify family. We were a Spotify brand. And every year they put out something called a Culture Next report. And it's focused on like, what are the top trends in podcasting? And in 2023, they released a Culture Next report that showed how Gen Z, our students are using podcasting for educational purposes. And there are some great quotes in there that I wanted to share with you all that kind of prove that our kids want to be doing this in the classroom. So there are things, 60% of kids who were surveyed in this, and we're talking about thousands of people, said that they trust podcasting more than any other form of media because it represents the most diverse point of view, right? Kids aren't getting their news and their content from print online or TV. They're getting it from listening to podcasts. 3/4 of kids are saying that they listen to podcasts to learn about topics that they wish they learned about in school. And they're saying that podcasting allows for a refreshing space for debate and discourse, right? All of the things that we want our students to be doing in the classroom, they're listening to on their own at home. So how can we work with educators to bridge that gap and give students a vehicle that they want to listen to content and create content, but do it in a way that's safe and engaging and helps you promote your projects and your learning outcomes in the classroom?
100% love that authenticity and that way that students be able to share quickly and easily with an authentic audience.
Yeah, I agree. So when we think about what makes this so special for the classroom, there's a lot of things that are in Soundtrap that are going to really make this and make kind of the concept of podcasting easy for you to take out of the box, right? There's this misconception that in order to be a podcaster or use this kind of technology, that you really need to have these, this diverse set of hard technical skills. And that's really not the case with Soundtrap. We designed this to be really, really easy to use. And we have students as young as 2nd grade using our studio to create audio projects. So not only is it web-based, as I mentioned before, but we have everything that you need to build a podcast, record a podcast built in the studio. So one is like our loops library and our instruments. We have over 23,000 different sounds and loops and instruments and sound effects that you could just find easily with a quick search and add them into your podcast and use sound to convey meaning, right? And give your story more context or convey more emotion. We also have really great tools like our live transcription tool that allows students to have a transcription of anything they record with their voice in the project. But what's amazing about that is that you can actually, once you have your transcript, you can edit the project from the transcript, right? So all you need to do is highlight a sentence or two, click delete on your keyboard, and it's going to edit the audio out of your podcast that way, rather than having to go back and spend a lot of time on the arduous tasks of editing. We make it easy to do so you can keep the focus on the content creation piece. Additionally, we allow for real-time collaboration. This is really one of our true differentiators here. Our studio operates in a similar way of like a Google document. So you can add 2 or 5 or 10 students to a project. They can all get in there together, regardless if they're sitting next to each other in the classroom, if they're sitting in 2 different classrooms on your school site, or if they're sitting on 2 different school sites in your district. Your students will be able to collaborate on these projects in real time from anywhere, regardless of what device that they're on. And we also provide you with in-channel communicative devices that allow you to have live chats in the project or leave notes on different regions or aspects of the project. So you as an educator can really monitor their progress and give them feedback in real time when they need it the most, okay? And then lastly, it's designed for student use. So as I mentioned, we're designed to be COPA and FERPA compliant. We built a walled garden around each school and district subscription that allows you to control who your students are interacting with in the Soundtrap studio.
And then for all those Illinois educators out there, there is a SAPA agreement as well to make sure we're meeting that state compliance too.
Yeah. Yeah, great point, Brad. All right. So what does this look like in the classroom? It looks like a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, Soundtrap is a creative tool, no different than, like the notebook and the pens in their backpack, but they're using audio to create content and demonstrate what they know. So if you're sitting, if you're in an English language arts class and you're doing a poetry unit, students might be recording a poem into the Soundtrap studio and then using music and sounds from our loop library to add tone to that, right? And create like an audio landscape to convey the points that they're trying to get across. If you're in a humanities classroom or a history classroom, when I was a teacher myself, I was a middle school and high school history teacher. I would have benefited tremendously from having a tool like this because, one, it's a creative outlet for students to demonstrate their knowledge of historical concepts, but also what a great way to reflect and critique research that they're doing as well. I think back to my days in the classroom where I knew that 2/3 of my students couldn't read and write at grade level, but the way I was forced to assess them was to give them document-based questions and have them write argumentative essays. So right then and there at the start of that project, I knew that I was setting some of those kids up for failure because they didn't have the prerequisite skills that I needed them to have, right? But that was what was being asked of me. Had I been able to give them a place to record a podcast and talk about those primary and secondary sources to make arguments and back it with research and do that in a way where they're using their voice rather than using pen and paper, I think the outcomes of those projects would have been one, more meaningful and had a lot more success tied to them.
Absolutely. And I think that's great segue right to that. It's just thinking about, hey, like we always have, people always say, research says. Well, research is usually important. Research is definitely saying of like, hey, I can have those improvements in understanding and retention. This is a kind of a cool study, reading on through it. Talking about a group of students and who were compared to traditional assessment versus using creative podcasting as their form of assessment. They saw larger growths in those deep learning in that sort of approach rather than through pencil and paper, which has its place. Don't want to say don't want to get out of the way, but using that creative podcast energy, having those connections between those concepts can bring them to that overall both fluency in speaking, but something that's in their own words, same concept, same idea, just something that's honest and authentic for them, of how I can have that sort of authenticity. But I want to think about, hey, how do I teach with this thing? I see how I teach this thing is that our brain is only, capable of holding, so much of what I got going on in there. How do I interweave it? How do I find those ideas? And that's where I think about, hey, how can I bring podcasting into there? Because students had their favorite podcast. I was talking with a group of students today. We were talking about a Minecraft podcast. They geeked about this Minecraft podcast they're going on through there, talking about their discussions, being able to verbally explain it, show that excitement. But then if I ask them to write about it, that kind of starts to diminish and go away. Not for everybody, but for some of them, it's, I have that really great way of saying how I can be excited and being able to share it. And they all have those interests. So how do I weave those into those certain areas? And it's not just like in that one way of how I can think about that one class, that one particular way, but, how can I use podcasting tomorrow? And like, how can I bring it to my classroom quickly rather than anything else? And so I'm going to hit on 4 different areas specifically: ELA, math, social emotional learning, and music. How Soundtrap can be used based on things that are from the library themselves. These are lessons that are already pre-created from teachers by teachers. They'll even have all the who created those lessons, where they're from. There's plenty of actually Illinois educators that have contributed to that Soundtrap library. But of how I can be able to have those lessons to be able to teach from, so I can then be able to create my own. So it's not as daunting, right from the get-go if I'm thinking about podcasting with my classroom, which can be, feel like quite one of those daunting ways. So let's take a look at ELA first, that English language arts. I always think about, hey, simply just creating a podcast in ELA. If I could have those big ideas debated, how I could bring those literatures to life, both physically and in an audio way through podcasting. I can have that, deeper connection and deeper engagement and creativity in something like having a character interview, or if I have two actual characters that I can have, be able to have those discussions inside of a podcast, because I have a place where students can be able to collaborate together easily. Think about some of those, even having a researcher who can have a recommendation of something. Particular book, I can be able to have those ways where students can talk about those books, share those books with somebody else, and be able to have it easier than just saying like, hey, here's a book review that I wrote on out. Hey, let's listen to it. Let's pop in our earbuds and be able to have some of those ways they can work on those things. As a former English teacher before, as an instructional technology coach, thinking about my speaking and listening skills are always something that I always tend to shirk off, because I would always be focused on my informational text skills, my literature skills, my writing skills, my language skills, my written language skills. So thinking about how I can be able to hit some of those speaking and listening standards while working through all of my ELA standards at the same time. So thinking about podcasting in those English classroom, there's a ton of different ways how I can think about how podcasting fits into there. Now, it's going to take a weird little turn. This is where I'm thinking about my social emotional life, and kind of can fit into social studies too. Think about how I can have that message for the next generation. A lot of times you'll always have those students who are, my older brother told me about this class. Well, why don't I make a podcast about it? Why don't I record exactly what I want to tell somebody, setting them that message on down? And that's where this particular lesson is coming right on out of the library to help out with thinking like, hey, how can I actually pass down that oral history to somebody else without having to just tell them in the hallway or telling them offhand? I can actually have it recorded as one of those time capsules for those people to be able to do so. That's a really cool example project of a letter to a future class. It's not just me actually scribing out a letter. It's me having all those emotions, having all of those pain and strife, all of the things that I went through in the 5th grade to be able to pass on to that next generation. Seems trivial, but be a way that you both get some catharsis for yourself as a learner, but also, hey, how I can share with the next generation, and something that's for me to refer back to. Especially like, hey, I can pass it on to my parents, I can pass it on to my family, and be able to have some of that sharing rather than just on a piece of paper, which is really, really, really cool. But how can I share it even on something that's having an anytime memento for someone? And then naturally, it still fits in the English classroom. And I think about that reader's theater. It's always a big thing for a lot of especially younger teachers. And it transcends all the way through high school, of having those ways to be able to think about how I can have some of that repeated reading for students, because they're actually recording it. But Chad was talking earlier about, we have all these sound effects. Now I can actually, instead of just me creating those sound effects in person, why don't I just loop them on in? Why don't I add them on in automatically? Because I have it all within my studio in the same place, bringing to life some of those ways that I can be able to have a full theatrical production, whether it's a radio play or even just creating something that's going to be something that increases that fluency for themselves. And so it's great because they have something that fosters that creativity and ownership in the classroom that creates that through those shared performances and interactive feedback with their classmates. Because, hey, we can add it in the comment section. I could be thinking about it as the way that I'm sharing it with somebody else. And so think about how my reader's theater could be one of those ways to be able to share with other people using podcasting. Now, another lesson coming right out of the library is actually thinking about social emotional learning and how I might incorporate that in the classroom for, a fun, expressive layer for what I might do on a regular basis. Thinking about how I might have the way that I can actually talk about my feelings and have that vocabulary be something that they've heard, something that they share, something that's coming from a peer or somebody else that is not just their teacher sharing it with them. Instead, think about how I can think about empathy and resilience and teamwork, both in the process of creating it, but how I can share that with somebody else in a simple and easy way. Really helps with fostering that self-actualization and self-awareness for themselves, and thinking about their emotional literacy and how they can be able to discuss it in a way that's not as high stakes as, sometimes putting myself in front of the classroom, but still getting the way that I can be able to share how I'm feeling in that moment in time, being able to discuss it. And so I'll strengthen that SEL and all those other speaking, listening skills that I'd like to be able to continue to strengthen, making it more relatable and enjoyable for everyone. Now, we got over ELA, talked a bit about social studies, some of that social emotional learning. Thinking about math, it's kind of a weird thing to think about when I'm recording and thinking how something could work. A Fibonacci sequence, something that is always kind of elusive, is how I can make some of those ways of pattern recognition and thinking, even getting towards my computational thinking, how I can make it something that's approachable for them. And so that's where using something with music, using something with loops, counting patterns, how I can think about how I incorporate some of those high interest areas of their lives, which are typically music. It's hard to find somebody that's not interested in some form of music and be able to spot some of those Fibonacci sequences throughout some of their own music, because they can very clearly and visually see it in a Soundtrap production versus something else, which it might be, me just listening to it in the air. I can actually see my beats as I'm going across there. And so helping with that pattern recognition and creating some of that numeracy using audio versus, just, thinking about listening and otherwise. And then one of those last ones I want to be able to think about is the actual music classroom. And this is one that I used to have as I used to teach 8th grade. And it was a fun one because it was wrapping up the end of the year. We're at the end of 8th grade. How can we do something fun? And I had to introduce the concept of a ringtone because a lot of folks now don't actually use a ringtone because it's I don't know. I actually don't remember. Chad, is your phone normally on silent? My phone's normally on silent on a regular basis.
100% of the time.
Yeah, it's always on silent, and that's kind of what they've grown up with as well. Is like, hey, my phone's on silent, but why don't we actually create a ringtone? Some kid yells, yeah, that's my mom's phone's always on ring, on like too loud in the middle of the movie theater. So we actually can create some of those using some of those loops and bringing things into there and have that final MP3 to be able to take it to as a ringtone if they wanted to. Do they actually have a ringtone on their phone? No, but it's something that creates both that tie to history and then also bring in those aspects of creating their own music by something that's approachable, such as a sound just coming out from their phone, as a way to think about technology and innovation and how far it's come in just literally just 10 years of what we might be in society. So always some quick ways. Now, all of these lessons that I've gone on over are going to be directly in the library. They're all going to have Common Core skills attached to them, whether they be for that general range. You can be able to scale them up if you need to. And they'll come with lesson plans directly from teachers, which is one thing that I find really to be nice is that, I want to have something that some other teacher has used to be able to use in the classroom. But there's also going to be assessment rubrics, which is something that I always like to grade on a rubric to be able to say like, hey, this is what I'm able to grade from. And those rubrics are all available in the lesson library in Google Doc format for you to be able to edit, make a copy and edit of your own of what you would like to have in there, which is helpful for, me being assessment. I want to think about how I'm assessing my students. I could have something to be able to look to be able to have some of those creative projects graded equitably and across the board. So before I wrap up and toss on back on over to Chad, I want to think about how I want to be able to use podcasting in the classroom to not just replace something, but instead think about those new learning opportunities for students. Because there's, so much that I can say as the teacher, as the person at the front of the room, and how much students still want to say themselves. They might not all find their place within there, but they have that way to be able to express themselves in the best way possible.
Yeah. So along with this, what you're going to find inside of the trial that you create, or going to our teacher portal, which is edu.soundtrap.com, you'll be able to find a large and diverse amount of teacher resources, a community where you can find our blog and really anything that you need, anything and everything you need to use this effectively in your classroom. Lesson plans across all subject areas and grade levels, our culture capsules, which is something that we do to kind of make, to help teachers create more meaning around like using podcasting and storytelling in their classroom. We also have like a self-paced certified educator course that you can complete and call yourself a Soundtrap certified educator, as well as a modified version of that for students too. And if you're looking for a more thematic approach to getting started to podcasting in your classroom, I want to shout this from the rooftops: the KQED Youth Media Challenge. Here in the Bay Area, KQED is our local PBS and NPR affiliate. They have created this amazing Youth Media Challenge in partnership with Soundtrap. It's a completely free curriculum and a student showcase that allows you to work with your students to create various forms of podcasts and audio projects. They have really 3 different tracks: a commentary track, a narrative track, and like an informational research track. And it's going to walk you through everything you need to know on how to like draft, script, record, edit, and publish a podcast. And you can publish this to the KQED Youth Media Challenge Student Showcase, and winners are actually highlighted on the air, like on NPR. So if you haven't explored this yet, I highly recommend it. Even though KQED is based in San Francisco, we have people from all over the country, all over the United States submitting their work. It's absolutely fantastic. So all you need to do is search KQED Youth Media Challenge in your internet browser and your web browser, and you'll be able to find it easily.
As an Illinois educator, it's great for media literacy as well. Be able to discuss with students. Media literacy is a big thing that's passed throughout Illinois for all students to be able to understand and have some sort of media literacy in the classroom. KQD was one of the places I still look and still use on a regular basis, even as an Illinois-based educator. Oh, it is. I try to be magic and make things change, and I realize I'm just clicking the wrong thing. It happens.
It was great. I think it just added a little bit more dramatic effect.
Just getting annoyed at a mouse. Yeah, all the time. That's how I always feel.
Yeah, and with that, that kind of wraps up the main part of our discussion today about Soundtrap. We thank you for your time, and I hope this was informational for you all.
Chad, Brian, thank you so much for being on air with us today. We do have a little bit of time left here to take questions in the chat. So if people have any questions about podcasting or Soundtrap, please feel free to leave those in the chat. And then there are a couple bits of housekeeping here that I'll wrap up before we go. But while we're waiting for questions in the chat, I just wanted to say, first, thank you for being here. Secondly, what a great opportunity for teachers to learn about ways to use audio projects in their classroom. When I was an English teacher back in the day, we actually used podcasting specifically as like our text. So instead of reading like a novel, we listened to NPR's first season of the Serial podcast, which the kids loved because it was, dramatic, and it led to a lot of good debates. And so another great way to use podcasts in the classroom is just think of them as like your primary text and have students listen to them and use that for like media analysis, literacy analysis, to dissect it as like an informational text. So so many ways to use podcasting in the classroom.
100%. And like not limiting it to even like thinking about high school as might be the logical thought along through there. Thinking about how that oracy is super important, even starting as young as coming out when you're starting to speak. I want to think about how I want to have that congruent thought before it even comes out.
For sure.
Yeah.
I got one comment in the chat real quick. And Jennifer asked if there's any way for professionals to collaborate with students through Soundtrap. Chad, do you have any insight on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. You can really have anybody you like collaborating with students in Soundtrap. We see it pretty commonly. Districts who have an employed teaching artist come in and interact with kids that way. You would just need to add them to your school or your district subscription. All right. There's no way for them to have an outside of account and then be allowed into or temporarily collaborate with kids. So as long as you're just adding them to the subscription, then they can, you'll be able to control who your students can and cannot collaborate with.
All right. Well, I think then if there are no more questions in the chat, it looks like Chad, thank you for sharing your email in the chat as well. If anyone wants to contact Chad, I'll pin that as well. And yes, please feel free to copy down that email. Otherwise, I think we're going to give everyone today the gift of time, a wonderful thing to always give, and say goodbye to our presenters and say goodbye to all of you in the chat. So with no further ado, again, thank you, Chad, Brian, for being here today. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Of course.